And to the local market now, and despite a strong lead from the US, it was only going one way, and that was down. I spoke to James Rosenberg from Macquarie Private Wealth a little earlier. Well, James Rosenberg, Wall Street got a lift from Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke. Not so the local market. What was going on?
Oh, Tiki, good evening. A little bit disappointing, I guess, in terms of today's trade, but let's not forget that we did factor in a fair bit yesterday and, in fact, the last couple of days. The Federal Reserve Chairman, in his testament to Senate, probably was a little bit disappointing to some in the light of no further quantitative easing. But he has said that he's left the door open, particularly given that inflation remains moderate and unemployment is stubbornly high.
Well, let's go to some stocks. And we've just heard about those production numbers from BHP Billiton. How are investors treating them?
Well, very poorly. The production numbers were very solid, particularly in iron ore, following good numbers from Rio and Fortescue earlier in the week. But sadly, BHP's shares underperformed yet again. Now, really, I think investors are not focusing on the production numbers, but more the macro environment, where there are risks in the world, particularly in Europe and also with a slowing China. BHP's now at multi-year lows, and with a prospective yield of about 5% fully franked, people are even starting to talk about it as being a yield stock. Certainly not like some of the others, but it does show you how far the stock has fallen in an environment where their production's actually been pretty solid.
I see Asciano has announced a sizable investment in its container terminal at Port Botany in Sydney and a few job losses. How significant is this?
Well, it's very significant because they're facing increased competition from the likes of Hutchinson Whampoa. They really do need to make that terminal as efficient as possible to remain competitive. The company's going to invest $348 million, mainly in cranes and straddles. It will sadly involve the loss of 270 jobs. And while the market's been expecting it, it's probably about $50 million more than expected, but some of that will be offset by increased productivity gains, and it really should turn Port Botany into a world-class terminal.
And finally, Lendlease shares are up 2%. I'm wondering how much that has to do with the Sunshine Coast Hospital contract awarded by Queensland Health.
Well, in the lack of other news, I'd say pretty much fully in relation to it. Lendlease haven't announced any details financially, other than the whole project will be about $2 billion and their share of it about $1.2 billion. The details will be announced at the end of the month, and at that stage the construction will commence. Lendlease are also involved in redevelopment of Liverpool Hospital in Sydney and the Royal Melbourne Children's Hospital. So it is an increasingly important arm for them, and the market rewarded the stock with a rise of almost 2.2%. So good news for Lendlease shareholders.
James Rosenberg, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, thank you.
To the other major movers on the local share market now, and the gold sector gave up more than 3% as Newcrest shares weighed heavily. Woodside Petroleum fell back. The company will release quarterly production numbers tomorrow. Insurance Australia Group made headway as the financial sector generally gained ground. Discretionary retailers were mostly firmer, but David Jones bucked the trend. Turning to currency markets, the Australian dollar edged down after hitting a two-week high. And in commodities in New York, oil is just over $89 a barrel. Gold is trading at $1,580 an ounce.